Now and make a formal introduction for our listeners. All right, so good afternoon, Jan. My name is Claudio, and with me as well is Christian from Santiago, Chile. Let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. From the studios in Fairfax City, we are very humble and grateful that Jan Boddy accepted our invitation to our show. Jan is a British electronic musician and composer. He first got into composing music in the late 70s in Newcastle. Having fallen in love with the sound of electronic bands such as Tangerine Dream, he came across a studio filled with reel-to-reel tape machine and analog synthesizers, and the rest is history. Jan, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you very much.
So the format is of the interview, I will ask 2 or 3 questions, then Christian will ask, and then you can ask as well, you know, very, very informal.
Just give me 1 minute. I'm just going to turn my speaker down. Just 1 second, please.
No problem.
That's better. I had it turned up before when we were auditioning what we were going to talk about.
So this has been a weird year for everybody with the virus and all over the world, not just in your country. But how are you doing? How is this affecting your creativity now that you cannot play any gigs? And but you have you have all your gear behind you. So
well, yes, it's a very strange. It's a very strange time, and unfortunately, there's an awful lot of people will have been affected directly, or their loved ones or relatives in very sad and bad ways. Fortunately for me, so far, myself and my partner, we've managed to escape that side of things. We've kind of kept away from people. It doesn't bother me to have to go to pubs or shops or all that kind of stuff. I'm quite happy for the 2 of us to go for a lovely walk in the woods with our dog. That's I'm quite happy with that. So we're going to play safe until all this blows over. Hopefully the news of a vaccine sheds some light on all that. Yes, all my concerts, I think I had 6 or 7 lined up for this year, and they've all been wiped out, which obviously is very sad. I love playing live, and I've played live for a long time, but there's nothing I can do about that. Perhaps I've got to the point in life where I don't worry about things I can't change or do anything about. So I just try to concentrate on the things I can do something about. And obviously having my studio here, I've been able to concentrate a little bit more on DIN and release stuff and record stuff. And, you know, it's kind of maybe this pandemic for some people has given them a chance just to slow down a bit. Because modern life can be really crazily busy and hectic sometimes, and people are pursuing things that maybe, you know, they're not quite as important as they think they are. So, you know, every side of something has a good side perhaps, so that's possibly the good side, but obviously there's an awful lot of bad things with the pandemic, so I think we'll all be glad when things calm down a bit.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're in good shape with your wife, your dog, and everything's good. Were you born in any? I noticed that I believe that you were studying biochemistry before you got into music. Where you came from, like a musical family, if you will, brother, sister, playing instrument, or?
No, I'm an only child. I was born in South Shields, which is near Newcastle upon Tyne, on the northeast coast of the UK, of England, and I was very good at art when I was young. I used to like to paint, used to do abstracts, and when I was at school, everybody who advised you on what you had to do when you had a job when you got older would never tell you to do art. No, you can't do art. You're not going to make any money out of art. You're good at science, so what you should do is a science. Go and do a degree in science. So biochemistry was the one I did. So I obviously had some creative energy inside me, but I didn't discover playing and recording music until I was 18, 19 at university. I'd kind of messed around a bit with friends at school, but nothing that I would want anyone else to ever hear.
Yeah. But why electronic music? You can play, you know, piano, the guitar, compose music, you know, do like a pop.
This little story which I've told a lot of people, and it may kind of sound made up, but it's not. It's absolutely true.
All right.
When I was in my teens and coming into university, obviously the German electronic bands, Tangerine Dream, Klaus Schulze, Ashra, obviously Vangelis, all those guys, I loved their music. It's some of the early Tangerine Dream things to me. It didn't even sound like it was made by human beings. It didn't even sound like it came from this planet. It had this lovely a visual side to things. I've always liked music which has a visual side of it, even if it's in your own head. And whilst I was doing biochemistry, I still wanted to do my art. So I found this place called Spectral Arts Workshop, and they had screen printing, and I used to do screen prints. And I had some in exhibitions and sold a few. And I did that in my spare time because being a creative person, you have to have an outlet. If you don't, I think you can be not such a happy person. And one of my friends said, oh, you're into Tangerine Dream. Do you know there's a studio upstairs? And they have lots of the gear that these guys use, including this one here, wow. the VCS3. A lot of the early sound effects that bands like that use, plus people like the Radiophonic Workshop in the UK used that. And I went, oh, have they? So I walked upstairs, opened the door, and there was Revox tape recorders, VCS3s, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I had a little mess around with the gear. Within a month, I was so hooked, I stopped all the screen printing, packed all my prints away, and started to learn these instruments. And I've never stopped.
That's
I don't
great.
know why. It does something. It's something in me wants to create and work with these sort of sounds.
That's great. You know, at Christian and I also that we're, you know, we really love electronic music well, and you know, Tangerine Dream is you know so well known band. We interviewed Thorsten a couple of weeks ago, and then we are going to be interviewing the rest of the band. So we really love electronic music. So it's a beautiful thing. Go ahead, Christian. Go ahead with some questions.
Okay, first of all, Mr. An honor to talk to you again, because we communicated the first time back in the mid-'80s, I guess. So that's the way I introduced Ian Boddy here on radio in Chile. When you send me this, I don't know if you can see this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it says the South American Connection. Remember this?
Yeah, it's great.
And I have several letters. So everybody really began loving your music. I mean, not everybody, but you know, this music never has a big audience. But back in the late '80s, I was very lucky to have the chance to become the artistic director of Futuro FM, Future FM, and there I would play your music as often as I wished, and that's what I did. So it's an honor to be talking to you here at last. So I have a few things here in my mind. On your new album, you went back to more analog sound. What made you conceive this album using mainly these media, more analog than, you know?
Well, there's also some element of analog gear. I mean, the System 100M, which is just, you can see a little bit sneaking out the corner there. I've had that since, or one of the racks of 3 I've got now. I had since 1982 when I bought that, and I've still got it. And it didn't appear on every album, but I've always used the analog gear, but obviously alongside more modern digital keyboards and stuff. And I had an invitation from an artist called Blue Tech, Evan, who had already been on DIN with Liquid Geometries DIN 57. And he was doing an album called Portals, which is a double vinyl album, which is really, and he said that the brief for this, I really want you to go back to the Cosmiche 70s, the analog sound. And I went, okay. And I'd recently bought the Moog Matriarch, which is on the other side of the studio, which is a lovely analog hands-on. The sound you have is the sound you have. You can't really store sounds. It just is what it is in front of you. And I've always liked that kind of thing. And I did a track called Omicron, which, if I dare say myself, came out quite nice. It came out quite good. It was exactly what Evan wanted, and it proved to be a very popular track. So as the lockdown started to come in, I started to think to myself, this Omicron track's a really good track. Perhaps I should do some more in that style. And then it just kind of happened. And I started to use all this stuff a lot more. And it just sounded really nice. I got a tape echo of, sometimes in your life, you sell things which you wish you'd never sold. I used to have a Roland Space Echo, which is probably used on the climb. And I sold it in the mid-90s. And I thought, yeah, I wish I hadn't sold that. Because tape echo just does sound, no matter what the plugins say, it doesn't sound the same. It has a certain charm and feel to it. So I recently bought a tape echo as well. And I was using the Moog and I was using tape echo and sequences. And the whole thing just came together.
Right. Now, I visited your website, of course, and I've been impressed to see the many occupations you have. You have like 3 main areas, and I was going to ask you what kind of productions are requesting your services more often, like which area you have been more requested in, because you have this series of music for movies and documentaries. You have impact, percussion. Would you say that there's an area that's more requested, or one that you feel more identified with in your own music?
It depends. First thing I'll say is, if you're a creative person and you're professional and you're trying to make your main income, whether you do art or whether you write books or whether you compose like I do, I think it's a good idea to have an old English phrase, more than one iron in the fire. It's always good to have more than one income stream. For example, there's a lot of musicians who are really struggling at the moment. If your main source of musical income was playing gigs, at the minute, that's going to be really bad for you. Obviously, nobody could have predicted what was going to happen. But my point is, the amount of time I spend on these different activities has changed over time. The library music, where I compose music mainly for a company called De Wolf, where they asked me to do, say, an album of 20 short 3-minute pieces about space. So that's what I'll do. And then Neil gets sent all over the world. And when people make films and documentaries and TV shows, my music might get used in the background while somebody talks over the top of that. And if it gets used, I get paid a royalty on that. And that's great because I've been doing this for over 20 years. Also, they tend to ask me to do things with a visual element again. So about the sea or wildlife or space or all those kind of things I tend to do. And when they get used, which is great, I obviously get an income from that. The other thing is the sample libraries and contact instruments, which I've done, where various companies come to me because I know how to use a lot of this gear behind. I can program sounds that maybe not so many other people can do. So I've got a unique palette of sounds and I don't mind to share those sounds. And obviously I get an income stream from that as well. And then of course there's DIN and my own stuff and gigs. So whatever's happening in the world or whatever's happening at any one time, I've always got some way of making an income from all this. And that's good because that takes a lot of pressure. It takes a lot of pressure off DIN. I don't have to run DIN absolutely to make a profit. I do make something, but I can actually release the music that I want to without having a total pressure of the bank breathing down my neck saying you have to make more money.
Now, I was going to ask you precisely about DIN. What's your criteria to select the albums that are going to being put in the market? How do you select them? Because there's so much material.
It's a really hard question to pin down in a short way. In some ways, it's instinct. Obviously, most of the artists on there I either already know or I get to know over time. So I like to work with people who are, in my view, good, who are professional, who when you ask them to do something will just get on and do it. And I've got a certain standard, which I obviously like. I mean, it comes from me. It's my instinct. I know when something's good. A lot of people send me stuff which is okay, not bad, but not great. Now, not everything on the DIN label is going to be, not everyone is going to like everything I put out on DIN. Apart from me, everything I put out, I actually like. And that's, some things I know are going to sell well. I mean, for example, I knew the Node album was going to sell well. The Arc album sell well. My own stuff sells well. But I do like to give other musicians a chance where I don't think it's going to sell maybe so well straight away, but the album is a great album. For example, the Devox album, I don't know whether you've heard that, but the modular synthesizers and sequence on there are as good as anything I've ever heard. But it's the only album they've got out, so it's not a well-known name, but I thought it was really a good idea to release that, because I think over time people will get to know their name.
Now, I'm going to talk about your first two children, you know.
All right.
Yeah, how do you feel about these days, Ali? You say you select things that you think are good, and then the things that are okay but not so good to put them out. So what's your feeling about these two things that I think are fantastic, even after so many years?
Of course, they weren't the first things, because I actually had 3 cassette releases out before those. The Climb came out in 1983, and on vinyl, obviously, the step up from cassette to vinyl at that time was a big step up. I've never been ashamed or regret anything I've ever put out, because at the time when I put it out, that was where I was at. At that point in my life, The Climb was the best album I could do. A year or two later, Spirits was the best album I could do. Obviously, compositionally, you get more sophisticated as the years go by, more equipment, but there's still things on both those albums that I think are as good as anything I'm putting out these days. I mean, The Climb has a very an analog sound, of course. It even has a bit of, whoops, I'm going the wrong way, a bit of this. The 100M is actually on The Climb and is also on Axiom. So one was 1983, one was 2020, however many years that is apart. The Spirits was more of a digital sounding album, because the Yamaha DX7 had just come out, and I was one of the very first people, certainly in the UK, to get the Yamaha DX7. It's quite a bit more of a rock edge, because we've got like live drums on one track and singing on another track. In fact, that track, Living in a Ritual, there's a little story about that. Unbeknownst to me, in Berlin, in Germany, that track, Living in a Ritual, has become a bit of a cult track that some of the underground clubs play. And I've been going on all these years not knowing anything about this. So that's quite a strange and a nice thing to think about.
Like E2, E4 by Manuel Getching, huh? It became a classic dance track too.
Yes.
Do you remember this one?
Slow Motion.
Yeah, there's this track, Skylights. That's long ago. It's even before The Climb, I guess.
That was on my, let me think about this. I think that was on my 3rd cassette called Options, which I did at Spectro. If memory serves me right. I remember that track is a little side story. My father, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. That was one of his favorite tracks of mine, and it was the first time he'd heard something that I did, where he actually said, "Ian, I actually quite like that. That's got a nice tune. I like that one." So that was quite an important thing for me at the time, as you can imagine. And
it says it was recorded, I mean, January 1982.
Yes.
From and you had 3 cassettes out already by then.
Well, I think Skylights came out on a cassette called Options. I can't remember whether Options or the Flow Motion album came out first. It's the same track, so I obviously used the track on the compilation Flow Motion and on Options. I can't recall which actually physically came out first.
Okay, now let's go back a little bit to the Dean Records series. The covers for those albums, Ian, are very, very beautiful and special. I know that some of them have been made by your wife, she's a photographer. Do you think Dean will continue with that aesthetics, that proposal?
I think so. I remember I said I was good at art when I was young, and I've always loved art, and I like going to art galleries. Wendy, my partner, loves that too, and I've always wanted it from the very beginning. I wanted Dean to have a different aesthetic from a lot of the electronic music labels out there. A lot of electronic music labels, it's their choice, but they often use sci-fi and space and spaceships and all that. I've never done that. To me, it's a bit of a corny thing to do, and also, unless it's done really well, Portals is an exception. I mentioned Portals before, the double album that Blue Tech put out. The cover of that could, for example, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's a lovely painting by an artist who specializes in sci-fi. It could be the cover art to an edition of the book June. It's that good. That's great, but most of those covers I'm not so keen on. So I've always gone for a more open-ended, abstract kind of art, where it's not telling the person who has the CD or vinyl album what to think. It's more of an open-ended, more of an ambiguous. I don't know whether you've seen, and this looks really beautiful, the cover that Wendy did for Axiom. You can see the reflection in it. You can't really see it because of the reflection, but it's a photograph, but you're not sure whether it's a photograph or a painting because of the texture actually has a brushed feel to it. I don't know whether to see, again, the reflections. It's quite an ambiguous image. And I like that. So yes, and Wendy's doing these images, and we're actually producing really beautiful G-clay prints of these covers, just limited editions of 10 copies. And on the Bandcamp site, there's a few people that bought those images as well to actually see them to hang on their wall, which is nice. I'm sure later on we'll be talking about the tone science. That has a completely different aesthetic, these albums. And they're being designed by Matthew Shaw. And that has a very retro, almost 1950s maths textbook, Victor Vasarely kind of vibe. And when you see the four of these, I can't really hold all four up at once, but there's a lovely kind of, you can see the aesthetic. Yeah, there's a certain aesthetic to that. And I also believe that obviously it's getting harder as time goes by to sell physical items like CDs, but there are still people out there who like to collect physical items, either hardback books or vinyl records or CDs. So I want to make it as aesthetically pleasing an object as I can. So it's something that somebody will want to touch and feel and look and read about. So the cover art's always been very important.
And I should say that personally, if you can look at it spinning, it's even better. I really love vinyl.
Yes, well, there was a big gap between the early 80s vinyl records. Phoenix, I think, came out in 1986. But it's only obviously in the last few years that vinyl seems to be coming back quite a lot. I think people, the way I look at it is I know a lot of friends who say, I've got a hard disk drive with 1.5 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes or terabytes or whatever. You can't get emotional about a hard disk drive. But yourself, Christian, you've got records there that you got of me in 1983. It has an emotional connection. You can feel emotional about physical objects. You can't feel emotional about a collection of MP3 files on a hard disk drive. So I think that's why a lot of people are buying physical records and CDs, because they may be a little bit fed up of being spoon-fed a million files from Spotify or whatever. They want to actually own some things.
Yeah, and some people get anxious about clicking on the next file. So it's so easy to jump from one file to the next. So you end up listening to nothing. Like it's very different.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, I'd like to ask you, Ian, what do you think about the electronic scene that's coming up today, especially the new labels like Behind the Sky? You participated in one of the anthologies. Those labels working, and people working with Bandcamp. Is that a good alternative?
Bandcamp's great. Bandcamp, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the savior of the independent record industry, but in some ways it is. I mean, if you're an independent artist or record label now, Bandcamp is by far and away the best place to be. The streaming platforms are fine and they serve a purpose. And I always believe in giving people the choice. And if somebody wants to listen to my music on Spotify or iTunes or Amazon or wherever, that's fine. That's their choice. I'm not going to take away their choice. But if somebody wants to buy an album, a physical album, or buy a download, Bandcamp is by far and away the best choice for artists of my size, I suppose, and the kind of record label that I run. But even people who would just starting out, if it wasn't for Bandcamp, I don't even know how they would sell stuff, to be honest.
Okay, Claudio?
Yeah, going back to the Dean electronic label. I noticed that you have over 90 or so releases. Most of the people are like going back to the same question, right? So Christian and I and many people, I like things, right? I want to touch a CD. I want to open a, vinyl, so on and so forth. Do a lot of people from your website in particular do buy physical format that via vinyl?
Yeah, I put everything up on there. I mean, Axiom. There's CD, there's vinyl, there's download, and there's also the print. And there's also bundles of the print with the CD, bundle of the print with it. And if somebody buys, what's really one of the really cool things, if you buy a physical item like a CD or a record, you automatically get the download as well. So whilst the physical item, CD, vinyl, is in the post to you, you can download the album if you want, and you can hear the you can listen to it while you wait for the physical item to arrive. It's all automatic. Yes, I sell. Probably Bandcamp now is my biggest source of sales. I've got various distributors and mail order companies who also sell for me dotted around the world. Bandcamp now is probably the biggest amount of sales.
Right.
Hello again.
Right. And another good reason
sorry, Claudio. Shall I say it just froze? It got frozen. Yeah. So I hope you're taping the whole thing.
Yeah, it's good. The other thing is, for people like Christian and I that want to collect physical thing, after a show that you do, folks like I can go backstage and ask you for, take a picture with a group or for you to autograph a CD. So it's a good memory as well. It's like taking pictures. So you couldn't do that with a MP3, obviously, right? You're not going to bring your computer, right?
Yes, I guess, yes.
So it's a beautiful thing. Now, with respect to the library music composition, I noticed that you have penned over 20 albums with over 500 tracks or so, and you have the Sound Design Volume 1, Volume 2, and the other one is called Sinister Drama. I wonder if you can elaborate how the library music came about and the reason of doing that. And
well, I mean, obviously, it's a good source of income, and I used to also have people say to me, "Oh, your music should be used on TV and films." And probably every electronic music composer, you sort of say, "Well, yes, it would be nice." But I live in the northeast of England, in Hollywood, where all the big famous film composers and film gets is right over there. So the chances, it just doesn't happen. The famous Hollywood producers not just going to phone up Ian Boddy in the northeast of England one day and say, "Can you do a soundtrack for me?" Yeah. It might happen, but it's probably not going to happen. But the library music is a way where it's more of an anonymous. You're not writing specifically a soundtrack for a specific film. You're doing tracks in a certain style. I mentioned one about space. I've done one about under the water or nature, all those kind of things. When companies are making documentaries and little films or even adverts and films and stuff, TV shows, they're looking for music to go in the background where they can have a voiceover. And library music is where they go to. And because it's obviously more expensive to get a composer to compose a piece of music for you just for a film. But if it's more of a generic atmosphere you want, a library music track is a cheaper option. And I used to work for Akai, the sampler company, and I was doing a demonstration of some of their samplers, somewhere like Stoke in the UK, about 1995. And I would just play my own tracks. I would think I was playing some tracks of the Uncertainty Principle, and I was playing the samplers and had all that stuff going. And a guy called Andy Quinn afterwards in the audience came up to me and he said, your music would be really good on TV and film and stuff, like I said at the beginning of this part of the conversation. And I went, yes, it would be, wouldn't it? And he went, well, actually, I do tracks for this company called DeWolf, who I hadn't heard of at the time. And most people in the public domain won't have heard of these companies. He said, why don't you get in touch with them? And he gave me the top guy who we get in touch with. So I think I sent him a copy of The Deep. I don't know if you guys are familiar with The Deep. which I released in 1994. And as these things usually go, I talked to the guy at DeWolf, and he said, yeah, it's really nice, but we don't really have any work for you at this point in time. So I'm like, oh yeah, okay, just the usual thanks, but no thanks. And then suddenly, out of the blue, 6 months after that, he phoned me and said, actually, we've got a project which we think you would be good for. And I went, okay. So I wrote these tracks and they liked them. And then they asked me to do some more. And then they asked me to do some more. And it just escalated over the years. And I've done, as you said, about 20 or so of these albums. And it's a very good source of income because I get royalties. It's in the UK, you've got the Performing Rights Society, the PRS. You'll have your equivalents in the States and in South America as well. And every 3 months, 4 times a year, any of these pieces of music that's being used, wherever it is in the world, I'll get a certain amount of money for those, even on things I've already done 5, 10, even 20 years ago. So even if I don't get out of bed, I'll still get this income. So it still comes. So I can get that as a source of income coming in whilst I'm doing all this and doing din.
Now, you're a very prolific musician, and what, besides electronic music, is any particular type of music that you listen to now that you are, you cannot play gigs, so you need to be at home with your wife, and you like, pop music or
I like music that I think is good. Classical has always been a big love of mine. So where do we even start in the whole genre? Bach, J.S. Bach is always fantastic. The impressionistic composers, Debussy, Ravel, Satie, Vaughan Williams, the English composer. But then I like some of the really strange modern classical music. I like a lot of rock from when I was young. Before I got into the electronic music, I used to like bands like Focus and Genesis and Camel and Hawkwind and Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. So I've got a huge range of taste. Pop music, I like this. If it's a well-constructed pop piece of music, look, let's look at ABBA. I'm not really that keen on ABBA, but I can recognize when something is composed well, sure. As opposed to just, something which is just a silly tune, which is not really going to appeal to people, but maybe has a novelty factor. I don't mind listening to almost anything if I think it's, in my opinion, it's well composed and well put together. It could be as melodic as you want or as strange as you want, as long as it's kind of saying something.
Well, Ian, you're very not just prolific, but very well-known musician. Not just in Europe, but if you have the opportunity to do like a duo or play with another musician in particular, it's important to you play with somebody else. Let's say if you have the opportunity to do something. I've done lots of collaborations over the year, and that was one of the reasons I've started Din as well. There was several reasons, but I wanted to work with other musicians. Marcus Reuter I've worked with, the German touch guitarist, obviously Mark Shreve is Arc, Eric Volov I've worked with, Robert Rich. These are musicians that are as well known as I am, if not more well known than I. And all the collaborations I've worked with these and other musicians always bring something new. So when I work with Eric, I think we come up with an album that we wouldn't have done on our own. With Robert Rich, the same. Marcus Wright in particular, he's a completely different musical world in some ways that I inhabit. But when we work together, the two of us somehow come up with something completely new. And I've done music now for a long time. The first release was 1980, so exactly 40 years. And I cannot do the same thing over and over again. I'm not one of those musicians who try to sound like Tangerine Dream there's some elements of what I do obviously has connections, but I always try to forge ahead and do new things. I can't just do the same thing over and over again. So working with collaborations is a way of keeping things fresh. Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Very good answer. Thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Ian, is there any chance that we can expect some like live DVD or Blu-ray? You know, I don't know if I myself like to have physical format again in video. I like Blu-ray and DVD. The quality is amazing. Are you planning? Do you think that there could be some editions in the future of live shows or something?
Probably not. The problem with producing a Blu-ray or a DVD, a video, is it's very, very expensive. Because to do it well, you have to really go for it. You have to really have high quality cameras and cameras. You can't just use one. You have to have multiple cameras, people to operate the cameras, people to edit. It's a really expensive thing to do. I know that the guys from Node recently have done a really good DVD, Node Live DVD, but I know that's cost a lot of money to do that. It's not something that I feel that I would ever get a return on. I have to use avenues like YouTube. I put clips of concerts there. It's just too expensive for the amount of sales that I think I would generate. I would be heavily out of pocket, I'm afraid. So I would never say never, but probably not.
Okay. Now, I would like to mention two people that I think possibly were possibly very relevant, not only in your career, but also other people I remember in those days, like Ron Berry, the old series album that I think is fantastic. Do you remember Dennis and Janet Emsley?
Oh, of course. Obviously they started off the whole UK electronica thing. And the first one was in 1983. And until that time, I'd only performed concerts really close to home, within 20 or 30 miles of where I lived. I'd only done concerts in the northeast of England. And suddenly this UK electronica thing was being started up. I was already friends with Mark Shreve, and I remember going with Mark Shreve and Dennis and Jeanette Elmsley in the car to have a look at the first venue in Milton Keynes in 1982. So it was a big deal for me. It was a big deal for me to actually play at all the UK electronicas, but obviously most specifically the first one. I didn't even have a car. I had to get all my gear. Somebody else gave us a lift down with the gear. I got the train down and hoped the gear would be there when I got there. So yes, that was a long time ago. Same year as the Climb.
Yeah. Now, something else. You mentioned some of your favorite bands and albums. You mentioned Tangerine Dream, Vangelis, and Ashra. Would you point some of those of their albums, like one that you wouldn't be able to live without? You know, everybody has, like, for me, Rubicon by Tangerine Dream.
You've just answered my question. You just answered my question.
Yeah. Which are your favorite ones?
Rubicon and Phaedra, probably for Tangerine Dream. It's an interesting thing with Tangerine Dream because obviously they've been going for a long time, and their music has changed and evolved over such a long period of time. And what they do now is almost unrecognizable compared with when they first started out. And there's many reasons for that. And somebody made the point that in some ways a band that's been going so long, your favorite albums you have of them are the albums you first get into. So for me, I was a teenager in the 70s. So of course, those early and mid 70s albums are the first albums of theirs that I got into. So that's the time period where I like them the most. Maybe that's the same for yourself as well. Plus, I guess at that time on those albums, they really almost didn't know. There wasn't any rules. Nobody knew how to produce an electronic music album in the style that we all love. They were the first guys to do it. And of course, Klaus Schulze is a big influence as well. How do I even choose a favorite Klaus Schulze album? I'll choose one, Mirage, because it's beautiful. Yeah. It's like a lot of Klaus's albums. It's way too long. It's way too self-indulgent, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And it's not easy to do, to get that sound. Vangelis, That's a tricky one of Vangelis because he does so much stuff. I'm going to choose Heaven and Hell because it's crazy. No one's ever done an album like that. It's such a unique album. I don't like all of Heaven and Hell, but the good bits is fantastic, and it's such a unique album. I don't know of anyone who's done an album like Heaven and Hell. I don't know another musician who would even attempt to do an album like Heaven and Hell.
What do you think makes that album particularly good? I mean,
it's just crazy. It's just it shouldn't exist. I mean, what is it? Is it prog? Is it electronic? You got John Allison singing on the track. There's choirs. There's demonic voices. There's everything. It's just a unique. Probably it's a unique reflection of his personality. Like all musicians, all good musicians, he's a unique individual, and no one could have produced an album like Heaven and Hell. There's some of these other albums are like probably better, but I just pulling this off the top of my head.
Now we haven't spoken about the French scene that I'm not only referring to Jean-Michel Jarre, whose dad I could luckily meet and interview once he came back here in Chile for a song festival, famous song festival back in '89, I guess. He told me, I'm going to give you his phone number so that you can interview him, and he never did. I mean, I could never reach him back. Do you know Richard Beeman, for example? Heldon, of course.
Yes.
Zanop, do you know Zanop, who's a more recent character? Zanop with Z?
No, I don't think so.
No? What's your impression of this French scene? We know less about it than others. Heldon, for example, is totally dark and heavy, but you like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin.
I do. I mean, Led Zeppelin, of course, cover a huge range. Black Sabbath is something I grew up with when I was young, and a lot of people talk about heavy metal, and I don't think any bands quite sound as heavy as Black Sabbath does. There's something about Tony's double track guitars in those early albums. It just has a sound, a portentous, over the top, tongue in cheek, wonderful sound. I mean, Jean-Michel Jarre. His album, when was Oxygen? Was that 1978?
76.
76, gosh.
Yeah.
I think I got that when I was 18. And I wasn't so keen on it when I very first heard it. But looking back, and especially Equinox, you talk about the analog sound. To me, Equinox is the most lushly, warm, tape echoey kind of analog synth album I've ever heard. That's actually my favorite, especially the first 2 or 3 tracks. It's just got this. It doesn't so much come out the speakers. It just kind of oozes out the speakers, and it's just got this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sound. But it's the early. I'm not so keen on some of his later things, Jean-Michel Jarre. But he's always been what Jean-Michel Jarre has that the German guys didn't have. He was able to write a good tune. Tangerine Dream, for all their wonderful strengths, could never write a tune as good as Jean-Michel Jarre, which is probably why Jean-Michel Jarre commercially has been more successful, because the vast majority of people like a good tune.
And what about this lady now who's turned 80-something these days? Wendy Carlos, that I really, I'm sure that you do like Switch It on Bach.
I've got an original pressing, copy of Switched on Bach. It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite of hers. It's quite twee in a way, and Sonic Seasonings is the one for me. Sonic Seasonings is not typical of her output, but it was basically an ambient. It was an ambient album before anybody else, even before Eno coined the phrase ambient. And that, especially the autumn track, is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I think I've ever heard. The way she combines the very restrained and the analog synths playing, which with a slightly classical feel, with all these really atmospheric sounds of the sea and the birds and the heather burning, all those sounds. So Sonic Seasonings is actually my favorite album of hers.
Now, the last one from my side, Ian, if you had no chances, I mean, no, if somebody asked you to make pop songs like electropop, whatever they call it, would you be willing to do that, or would you not want to be involved in that scene?
It's not a case of not wanting to be involved in the scene. In a way, I mentioned this living in a ritual on spirits. That's probably the closest I've ever got to a pop song. I did actually do some pop stuff when I was young, when I was first doing my cassettes, and went down with a friend to the record companies, and we nearly got a record deal. Not quite, but nearly. But then I went down a different path. And I don't think I would do it now. I don't think I need to do it now. Maybe I might have done it. Your life, as you go through your life, it takes lots of different paths and forks. And looking back, I've had this unique route to where I am now. In another universe, through another path, I might have gone down the pop route. Because sometimes I have rhythms and elements of that in what I do. But it's not something I'm going to do now. I'm quite comfortable doing what I do.
Okay, well, I want to say thanks so much, Ian, for the time. Thank you, Claudio, for the invitation. It's like closing the circle after, I don't know how many years, I first played Boddy in Chile. And so it's nice to have had the chance to talk to you directly, face to face, amazingly. So yeah, we never thought that we could do this 20-something years after I first heard your music. So thank you for your time. Take good care and keep up the good work.
I will do.
Yeah. You remember? We'll ask a couple last final questions. Do you remember where the first 2 albums or 3 albums that you ever bought when you were younger?
Yeah, good question. I think Focus. Have you heard of the Dutch band Focus?
Of course, Christian.
Yeah. I think probably Focus 3 was one of the very first albums. I think that 1972 or 73. I may not have bought it when it first came out, but I think I was probably 14 or 15 when I bought that. And the lovely double sleeve, and then Hamburger Concierto, and we read all the instruments. And of course, we used to, my school friends and I used to do something which I don't think many young folk do now. And when you tell them about this, they kind of look at you as though you're slightly mad. And that is, when a new album came out of a band which we all liked, obviously in school, different groups of people like different kinds of albums. I was at an all-boys school. And when the new Focus album came out, we would go around to our friend's house, whose elder brother had a really good hi-fi, and we would sit in the front room, and we would put, it was 3 or 4 of us, we would put on this vinyl record, and we would sit and not say a word and listen to it. That's what we would do for 40 minutes or 45 minutes. We would just listen to it. Then we would stop, get a cup of tea or whatever, and we would chat about it and look at the sleeve and put it on again. And while we talked about it, for the whole, I'm sure maybe you guys did this kind of thing. It was great. Me and my friends would sit around, and that's all we would do. We had no mobile phones, no computers, no games. Yeah. The actual process of sitting and listening to an album of music, especially with friends who like the same kind of music, was absolutely enough to have a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Christian. I think
Yeah, no, I asked Claudio to mention the following, Ian. Focus have been here like 4 times in Chile. Luckily, I really love them because exceptionally, their albums, The Live at the Rainbow, was published in Chile. We have very, very few progressive albums published in Chile, if at all. So once I had a short conversation with Thijs Vallier, and he said to me, the best thing that I've done is this. And I asked him to sign my copy of Pedal Point, Dona Nobis Pacem. I'm sure you're familiar with that. With the Chilean musicians, Mario Argandoña and Tato Gomez, and Thijs Vallier and Jan Ackerman, the Latin Mass.
I don't think I am. Actually, no, I haven't heard about that.
Yeah, please go to YouTube and listen to it. It's a fantastic, wonderful composition. It's a double album with some nice dubs on the cover. So that's what he said. This is the best I've done in my whole career. So,
or maybe send me the link. If you send me the link later on, be cool.
Sure. Well, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. You mentioned before, yeah, that obviously with the coronavirus and most of the gigs they have been canceled, but assuming that, you know, the virus will go away with a vaccine or what have you, do you plan to do any gigs in the States or in Latin America if possible?
Well, Latin America, I've never played before. It depends whether somebody invites you, and also obviously when you go that far, there's a certain degree of expenses which need to be covered. Philadelphia in the States, I've played at a few times because Chuck Van Zyl, who does the Stars End radio show, he organises the Gatherings series of concerts. So there's a good chance that I'll go there again. We'll just have to see when. And I've got some more concerts. I mean, some of the concerts that have been cancelled this year, there's a tentative alternative dates for 2021. But at the moment, it's too early to pin down exact dates. But I'm sure, I mean, the viruses, I mean, of course, having done biochemistry, I kind of understand quite a lot of how these things work. The virus will never go away completely. It'll become like flu. And each year you get a vaccination because it always mutates, viruses always mutate. And you'll get a vaccination. In the UK, certainly you get each autumn, people who are susceptible to, especially older people, they get a vaccination for flu. You'll get a vaccination the same each year. But it exists now, so it will never disappear completely. But we'll obviously get it under a degree of control where we can obviously live more normal lifestyles than we are at this point in time.
Got you, Chris. Thank you very much. And if you're comfortable, then again, I will rephrase that. If you're comfortable, you want to play a couple of tunes?
Well, I've got this. We mentioned Omicron before, which is the opening track on Axiom. It was used on Portals. Obviously, I use a computer to record these things, and I use Ableton Live. And I had all the different parts either recorded as pieces of audio, because a lot of the analog gear, you have to record them as a piece of audio because they're never the same twice. They always kind of change and drift. But I wanted to get the MIDI information and the information out of the computer and use the modular instruments just to play it all back. So I was just kind of working on something. So if I turn the screen a little bit, I mean, I might get in the way.
Beautiful.
I've got a more modern rack down the bottom here, and this has actually got the sequence information that's going to play two sounds from the Roland System 100M. You can probably see there's a rack right at the top there, and that's going to play the high sequence line, which is like arpeggios, and the bass line, and then some of the drum loops from the original track. There's a sampler module here where I put the drum loops in, and the sequences also triggers those. This means I can now have a version where I can play it live. I'll play some chords as well, although I haven't got that set up today. I was just working on this part. But it means if I do play live, I can interact with it more. It's not just the same as playing to a backing track. So if I press play, I may have to turn the volume up to a point where you guys can tell me that it's loud enough.
Yeah.
Yes, it's good.
Okay.
Is that loud enough?
Yeah.
Turn it down so that you could just say I could interact with it more. I was just changing some of the sounds.
Yeah.
I don't know how clear. It's hard to actually play that, and it's only come through one speaker. The speaker's behind the computer, because I've got this turned at an angle. But that's just using this kind of gear live. I don't use the 100M live that often, because it weighs quite a lot to cart that around. But the modular gear, I'm just kind of working on ideas of how I can recreate this track live. So yeah, so I don't know whether that came through.
Great. Well, Jan, thank you again very much for your time. And I believe that Christian shared the link with you.
Okay.
The ones he mentioned that is in YouTube, or I can send you that. Well, hopefully we'll, I would like to meet you one day, and hopefully I live like 2 hours from Philadelphia. So if you ever, do some gigs here in the East Coast or in Washington, DC, I would love to meet you and go for a drink or coffee, whatever. And then, we'll be nice. Thank you very much for your time, and keep up the good work, man. You're doing very good work, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay, cheers.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.